The crackle of a breaking news alert pierces the silence. Global cases surge, hospitals overwhelmed. A novel coronavirus emerges. The disembodied voice fades, replaced by a low, haunting drone. What if this moment was foretold? A narrator whispers, icy and deliberate. Asterisk, not by scientists, politicians, or prophets of doom, but by a 12th century Irish saint who vanished into legend? The air thickens with the weight of centuries as the name Saint Malachy unfurls, a shadowed figure who, in 1143, left Rome with 112 cryptic Latin mottos, each purportedly predicting a future pope, and the fate of their era. Among these fragments of prophecy, whispers persist. Did he encode warnings of history's deadliest plagues? The Black Death's rotting breath, the Spanish flu's phantom grip, COVID-19's invisible siege, all seemingly tethered to Malachy's. Riddles. Consider the Rose of Arras, the motto tied to Pope Clement VI in 1347. As the Black Death devoured Europe, Clement's reign became a macabre theater. The papal court in Avignon burned corpses in perpetual pyres. The faithful clutched rosaries to ward off a pestilence that painted its victims in lurid rose-hued rashes. Coincidence? Or had Malachy's rose bloomed in prophecy? Leap ahead. 6 centuries, 1918. The world bled from war as the Spanish flu stalked trenches and cities alike. Pope Benedict XV, branded with the motto "Religion laid waste," presided over a desolate Christendom. Churches shuddered, prayers drowned by coughs, faith itself gasping for air. Now, in our age, Pope Francis bears the final prophecy, Petrus Romanus. Peter the Roman, Malachy's last pope, said to reign as the world unravels. COVID-19 sirens wail, conspiracies ignite. Is this the prologue to apocalypse? Yet beneath the eerie parallels lies a darker truth, the human hunger to forge order from chaos. Malachy's prophecies, dismissed by scholars as a 16th century forgery, endure because they mirror our timeless dread, the fear that history is not random but a ghostly script waiting to be decoded. The mottos bend like riddles in smoke, their meaning shifting with each catastrophe. Are they divine warnings or simply the echo of our own desperation? The answer lingers in the static between past and present, where saints and plagues whisper secrets only the terrified can hear. Asterisk, the fog of time curls around the figure of Saint Malachy of Armagh, a man cloaked in the mystique of medieval Ireland. In 1143, he embarked on a pilgrimage to Rome, a journey that would etch his name into the annals of the occult. Legends claim that in the Eternal City, gripped by visions of divine terror, Malachy collapsed at the foot of the altar in the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls. When he awoke, he carried with him a scroll of 112 cryptic Latin mottos, each a shard of prophecy, each assigned to a future pope, stretching centuries beyond his death. The prophecies were not mere names or dates, but riddles steeped in heraldry, geography, and symbolism. Ex Castro Tiberis, from a castle on the Tiber, Flos florum, flower of flowers, Religio Depopulata, religion laid waste. To the faithful, these fragments were divine roadmaps. To skeptics, they were smoke and mirrors. Yet their allure lies in their ambiguity, a cipher that seems to hum with foreboding whenever catastrophe strikes, but shadows cling to Malachy's legacy. The prophecies vanished for nearly 400 years, only to resurface in 1595 within the archives of a Benedictine monk named Arnold de Wayen, a man with ties to the Counter-Reformation's fevered propaganda machine. Scholars have long raised an eyebrow at the timing. The late 16th century was an age of upheaval. The Catholic Church, reeling from Protestant critiques of papal corruption, craved tools to reassert its spiritual authority. What better weapon than a prophecy that framed popes as figures ordained by God to navigate humanity through apocalyptic tides? The mottos, critics argue, were retrofitted, a clever forgery designed to flatter powerful pontiffs or slander rivals. For instance, the motto Lumen in Caelo, light in the sky, for Pope Urban VII, whose brief reign in 1590 coincided with a comet's appearance, feels too convenient, too neat. Yet even forgery carries its own dark magic. Why would a 16th century fabricator choose to end the list with Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, a pope who would feed the sheep amid great tribulations before the final judgment. Was it a warning to a fractured Christendom, or a self-fulfilling curse? The structure of the prophecies deepens the enigma. Each motto functions like a tarot card, vague enough to bend to interpretation, specific enough to chill the spine when history aligns. Take Peregrinus Apostolicus, Pilgrim Apostle, assigned to Pius VI, the Pope deposed by Napoleon in 1798 and exiled like a wandering pilgrim. Or De Medietate Luna, from the half moon, linked to John Paul I, whose 33-day papacy in 1978 began and ended under a crescent moon. Coincidence? Perhaps, but the human mind thrills to such patterns, stitching chaos into narrative. Even the gaps in Malachy's list are telling. The prophecies skip anti-popes and political puppets, as if the saint's vision filtered legitimacy through divine sight. Yet for every eerie hit there are misfires. Aquila Rapax, rapacious eagle, assigned to the 16th century Pius VII, ostensibly nods to Napoleon's imperial emblem, but the Pope spent his reign in conflict with the emperor, not collaboration. The prophecies, like all good myths, are a Rorschach test. Believers see prophecy. Skeptics see pareidolia, the mind's desperate itch to find faces in static. What endures is not their accuracy but their power. Malachy's mottos tap into a primal fear that history is not a random walk but a coded text, its meaning hovering just out of reach. They thrive in the liminal space between faith and fraud, where a 12th century saint's vision blurs with Renaissance intrigue. To read them is to wander a hall of mirrors, where every reflection shows a different truth. A divine warning, a political gambit, a psychological mirror. And so the enigma persists, not because it answers our questions, but because it magnifies them. In the end, Malachy's greatest prophecy might be this, that humanity will always hunger for a story to tame the terror of the unknown, even if the story is written in ghost. The 14th century dawned with Europe teetering on the edge of oblivion. By 1347, the Black Death slithered ashore in Sicily, carried by rats and the stench of decay clinging to Genoese trade ships. What followed was a nightmare scripted in pustules and despair, villages hollowed into ghost towns, skies thick with the smoke of mass graves, and a death toll so staggering 25 million souls. Half the continent that chroniclers wrote of rivers choked with corpses, and fields where only the wind reaped what remained. The plague's signature buboes, swollen lymph nodes purpling like rotten fruit, burst beneath the skin while victims coughed blood in macabre final acts. This was not mere disease. It was a reckoning, a divine scourge, or so the trembling survivors believed. And at the heart of this maelstrom sat Pope Clement VI, the Avignon-based pontiff whose reign 1342-1352 bore the weight of Malachy's cryptic motto, Ex Rosa Atrebatensis, from the Rose of Arras. To believers, the rose bloomed with dreadful duality. Arras, a French city famed for its rose-shaped medallions, hinted at Clement's birthplace, but the prophecy's true venom lay in its symbolism. The rosary, a string of prayer beads devoted to the Virgin Mary, became a lifeline for the faithful, who clutched them as they naviged streets lined with bodies. Yet the plague itself wore a perverse floral crown. Its victims' rashes often flushed rose-red before blackening into necrosis, as if their flesh had been cursed to mimic a dying flower. Even Clement's actions fed the myth. He consecrated the Rhine River as a mass grave, sanctioned the persecution of Jews as poisoners of wells, and huddled in his palace, burning aromatic herbs to ward off miasma, a man both orchestrator and prisoner of his era's horror. Skeptics, of course, dissect the coincidence with scalpel-like precision. The Rose of Arras could simply nod to Clement's familial ties to the region, stripped of supernatural gloss. The rosary's rise as a devotional tool predated the plague, and the rose-colored rashes, while poetic, were neither universal nor unique to the Black Death, yet the human mind rebels against randomness. When the Pope's own physician, Guy de Chauliac, wrote of a pestilence that left roses of death upon the skin, The line between clinical observation and prophecy blurred. Even the era's soundscape conspired to deepen the omen. Monastic chants swirled with screams. Church bells tolled ceaselessly for the dead, and the whispers of the dying fused with prayers for deliverance. To hear it was to inhabit a world where every breath felt like a countdown. What lingers is the haunting question: did Malachy's rose prophesy the plague, or did the plague birth the prophecy? Clement's reign, bookended by pestilence, became a canvas for retroactive dread, a Rorschach blot inked in blood. The Black Death reshaped Europe's soul, eroding faith in institutions and birthing a morbid obsession with mortality, as seen in the dank, macabre art of the period. In this light, the prophecy serves less as divine warning than as a mirror to humanity's need to alchemize suffering into meaning, yet the echo persists. When the wind whistles through the ruins of Avignon's papal palace, it carries the faintest scent of roses, not the delicate fragrance of devotion, but the iron tang of blood, a reminder that history's darkest chapters are always ripe for reinterpretation. And perhaps, for those who listen closely, the tolling bells still ring with the same question: was it fate, or did we make it so? The year 1918 dawned with the world already in ruins. Trenches scarred Europe like open wounds, cities crumbled under artillery fire, and the stench of mustard gas lingered like a curse. Then, as if war itself were not enough, the shadows began to stir. A new horror emerged, silent and faceless, slipping through the cracks of battlefields and bustling ports. The Spanish flu, a phantom virus with a taste for the young and robust, coiled itself around the globe. By 1920, it had claimed 50 million lives, more than the war itself. Bodies piled in makeshift morgues, their lungs drowned in bloody foam. Entire families vanished overnight, leaving homes frozen in mid-breath. Amid this dual apocalypse stood Pope Benedict XV, the pontiff whose reign, 1914 to 1922, bore Saint Malachy's harrowing motto, Religio Depopulata, religion laid waste. The phrase chills the bone, for it mirrors the desolation of an era where faith itself seemed a hemorrhage. Churches, once sanctuaries, stood as hollow shells. Congregations dwindled as the faithful either lay dead or cloistered in terror, their prayers smothered by the rasp of dying breaths. In the trenches, soldiers joked grimly that God had abandoned them first to the machine guns, then to the virus. Benedict XV, a man of fragile stature but iron resolve, became a spectral figurehead in this spiritual wasteland. He pleaded for peace in a world deafened by gunfire, dispatched aid to the sick, and watched as the very institutions of Christendom charities, monasteries, seminaries emptied like hourglasses running out of sand. To believers, the motto was prophecy fulfilled. Religion had been laid waste, not just by war's physical ravages, but by the erosion of hope. The virus, they whispered, was divine retribution for humanity's sins. It spread as inexorable as the doubt it sowed. Skeptics dissect the connection with clinical detachment. The Spanish flu, they argue, was a zoonotic fluke, its toll magnified by wartime crowding and censorship. Religion laid waste could merely reflect Benedict's futile peace efforts amid geopolitical collapse, a critique of institutional impotence, not supernatural foresight. Yet the symbiosis of war and plague is undeniable. The virus rode troop ships and railroads, exploiting the chaos of mobilization. It thrived in the lungs of soldiers packed like sardines in trenches and field hospitals, their bodies already broken by shrapnel. When the war ended in 1918, the flu crescendoed in a second, deadlier wave, as though feeding on the adrenaline of armistice celebrations. Churches, desperate to retain relevance, hosted mass funerals that became superspreader events, grim parodies of community. Even the Pope's own directives to avoid panic felt like whispers against a hurricane. But the true horror of Religio Depopulata lies in its ambiguity. Was it a warning of religion's physical collapse, the literal depopulation of the faithful, or a deeper metaphysical unraveling? The war had already seeded existential despair. The flu compounded it. Survivors wrote of a world stripped of meaning, where God's absence was as palpable as the silence in empty cathedrals. Artists like Edvard Munch, who painted his gaunt, fever-ridden self-portrait, captured this spiritual void. Meanwhile, the Pope's encyclicals took on a haunted tone, begging for peace amid this twin scourge. As if even the Vatican struggled to reconcile divine providence with such senseless suffering, historians note that Malachy's mottos, forged or not, resonate because they are vague enough to bend to hindsight. Religion laid waste could as easily describe the Reformation's schisms or the rise of secularism, yet its collision with 1918 feels uncanny, a perfect storm of literal and symbolic ruin. The era's soundscape heightens the dissonance, the clang of war bells melding with the cacophony of ambulance sirens, the rattle of death throes punctuating Benedict's hollow proclamations. In the end, the prophecy's power lies not in its origin, but in its reflection of humanity's fragile grasp on meaning. The Spanish flu did not just kill millions. It exposed the fragility of the stories we tell to survive. Religion, science, patriotism all crumbled under the weight of a virus that did not discriminate. Yet in that collapse, Malachy's words found fertile ground. For what is prophecy if not a lantern we clutch in the dark? The 1918 pandemic fades into history, but the question lingers like a ghost in the rafters of an abandoned church. Was the world truly forsaken, or did we forsake ourselves? The answer, much like the virus, remains airborne, elusive, lethal, and eternally hungry. The 21st century's veneer of invincibility shattered in late 2019. A cough in Wuhan became a global tremor, COVID-19, a shape-shifting virus wrapped in spike proteins slipped through airports and borders, choking cities into silence. Streets once pulsing with life froze into dystopian tableaus, masks hid faces, ventilators replaced voices, and the death toll climbed with the cold precision of a digital clock. By 2023, millions had vanished into the void, economies teetered, and the very idea of normal dissolved into a fever dream. At the eye of this storm stood Pope Francis, the Jesuit pontiff whose reign, 2013 present, is shackled to Saint Malachy's most infamous prophecy, Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, the final pope who would feed his flock amid great tribulations before the world's fiery end. To conspiracists, the parallels ignited like wildfire. Francis, the first Jesuit pope, a reformer who took his name from the saint of radical humility, bore the weight of Malachy's apocalyptic coda. His papacy began under Benedict XV's shocking resignation, a prophecy within a prophecy. Some hissed as the church fractured between traditionalists and progressives. When COVID-19 struck, the whispers crescendoed, lockdowns emptied. St. Peter's Square, Easter Masses streamed to hollow chapels, and the Pope himself, isolated in the Vatican, delivered eerily prescient sermons on global solidarity as bodies piled in Bergamo's churches. Petrus Romanus, a name evoking both the papacy's founding apostle and Rome's imperial collapse, morphed into a hashtag, a meme, a digital age omen. Online forums seethed with theories. The virus was the Great Tribulation, the Pope an unwitting herald of Armageddon. QAnon zealots spliced his calls for vaccine equity into coded proof of a new world order. Even the virus's crown-like structure became fodder. Was COVID the thorns choking Malachy's final prophecy? Yet theologians dissect the mania with weary clarity. Prophecy isn't a puzzle to solve, but a mirror to hold up to our fears, argues Dr. Elena Rossi, a historian of eschatology. Petrus Romanus likely nods to medieval debates about papal legitimacy, not virology. Francis, the Argentine outsider, Pope, embodies the tension between Rome's imperial past and its uncertain future, a symbolic, not literal end. Even the Vatican's muted response to Malachy's prophecies speaks volumes, dismissed as a Renaissance-era forgery. In 1595, they resurface only when chaos demands a scapegoat, but reason falters in the face of dread. The pandemic's trauma, the isolation, the nebulous threat, the algorithmic amplification of fear reanimated humanity's oldest coping mechanism. Narrative, COVID-19 was not just a virus. It was a blank screen onto which we projected our collective end times mythos. The Pope, a figurehead of moral authority in a rudderless world, became a lightning rod. When Francis limped through empty basilicas, his arthritic frame bent in prayer, the image felt ripped from Revelation. When he denounced vaccine hoarding as a sin against humanity, conspiracists spun it as a confession. Malachy's prophecy, vague as smoke, bent to fit every twist, the ultimate Rorschach test for an age of existential vertigo. What chills? Most is not the prophecy's potential truth, but its resonance. COVID-19 exposed the fragility of our systems, our faith in progress, our trust in leaders. In that vacuum, Petrus Romanus thrives, not as divine truth, but as a metaphor. For collapse of institutions, of meaning, of the stories we tell to keep the dark at bay. The prophecy's grip lies in its ambiguity. It is both a warning and a dare. Will the next pandemic finish the job? Will the next pope be the last? The questions linger, unanswered, as the world lurches toward an uncertain horizon. And in the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica, where tourists once jostled for selfies, the wind now carries a whispered refrain, Finis venit, the end is coming. Whether by plague, prophecy, or the weight of our own myths, however, remains to be seen. The human mind is a labyrinth of shadows, forever hunting shapes in the void. From the birth of consciousness, we've spun stories to cage the chaos, constellations from star scatter, gods from thunder, prophecies from the raw static of existence. Consider Nostradamus, the 16th century apothecary whose quatrains, vague as smoke, have been retrofitted to everything from the rise of Hitler to 9/11s or the tarot. Its archetypes pliable as clay, bending to answer lovers and tyrants alike. We are creatures of pattern, hardwired to seek meaning even when there is none, especially when there is none. Saint Malachy's papal prophecies thrive in this primal fissure, where logic frays and the brain's hunger for narrative overrides. Reason, but is this divine foresight or simply humanity's oldest magic trick, the illusion of control? History, as scholars note, is a game of echoes. Dr. Lila Voss, a historian of medieval eschatology, dissects the allure of retrofitting. Prophecies are not predictions, but mirrors. When calamity strikes, we scour the past for reflections, stitching old words to new wounds. Malachy's mottos, she argues, are linguistic Rorschach tests, vague enough to fit any crisis, yet specific enough to feel ordained. Take * Gloria. Olive * Glory of the Olive. Assigned to Benedict XVI, some linked it to his Benedictine order, whose emblem includes an olive branch. Others, to his failed peace efforts in the Middle East. But where was Malachy's olive during the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, a tsunami of divine wrath that killed thousands under Pope Benedict XIV, whose motto, animal rural, rural animal, bore no cosmic weight? The prophecies, like all good myths, cherry-pick hits and bury misses, a sleight of hand that preys on our amnesia for the mundane. Psychologists probe deeper into the abyss. Dr. Elias Crane, a cognitive neuroscientist, cites apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections in unrelated events, and confirmation bias, the subconscious cherry-picking of evidence to fit a desired narrative. In uncertainty, the brain becomes a conspiracy theorist, he explains. It would rather believe a lie that orders the world than accept a truth that disorders it. The Black Death's rose, the Spanish flu's wasted religion, COVID-19's last pope, all are symptoms of this existential immune response. We graft meaning onto microbes and monarchs because the alternative that suffering is random, that power is powerless, that the universe is indifferent is a void too vast to stare into, yet skeptics wield Occam's razor with forensic precision. For every eerie match between motto and crisis, there are decades of papal reigns where Malachy's words dissolve into gibberish. Pius X, 1903 to 1914, branded Ignis Ardens, burning fire, presided not over flames but the calm before. World War I storm. The 19th century Pius IX, crux de cruce, cross from a cross, clung to papal territories lost to Italy's unification, a geopolitical footnote, not a cosmic sign. Even the final prophecy of Petrus Romanus stumbles. Francis, the alleged last pope, has outlived COVID's peak, his reign more reformist than apocalyptic. The prophecies, critics argue, are a self-fulfilling Ouija board guided, not by spirits but by the hands of the desperate, But what if the truth lies in the terror itself? Prophecy endures not because it is true, but because it is necessary. It is the torch we light in history's dark cellar, the story we whisper to ward off the silence. Malachy's mottos, forged or faded, tap into the oldest human dialect, the language of fear and hope, intertwined. They force us to confront the unanswerable not asterisk, do the prophecies hold power? But asterisk, why do we need them to? In the end, the enigma of Saint Malachy is not about popes or plagues, but about us, a species huddled in the glow of campfires, decoding omens in the stars, forever balancing on the knife's edge between coincidence and destiny. The final question lingers, as haunting as any prophecy. Asterisk, if the void truly is meaningless, what do we become when we stop pretending? To see shapes in the dark? Asterisk, asterisk, in the silent spaces between catastrophe and calm, humanity clings to prophecies like lifelines thrown into the abyss. Saint Malachy's visions, forged or faded, endure not because they unveil truth, but because they sanctify our terror. They transform chaos into liturgy, suffering into scripture, offering the illusion that the universe whispers its plans to those who dare to listen. This is the dark alchemy of mysticism. It turns random agony into a story we can endure. When plagues raze cities or pandemics paralyze nations, we dig through the rubble of history, desperate to find a pattern, a promise, a thread of meaning to stitch the void closed. Malachy's mottos, polished by centuries of fear, become relics of this hunger away to kneel before the unknown and call it divine. Yet the comfort they offer is a double-edged sword. To see prophecy in a pope's motto or a pandemic's timing is to surrender to the oldest human fiction, that we are not alone in the dark, that some hand, however shadowed, guides the storm. But what if the storm is all there is? The final narration lingers like a requiem, asterisk, whether divine warning or human invention. Malachy's words remind us that history's echoes are always listening for a pattern. And listen we do to the rustle of parchment, the sigh of a dying breath, the static between stars. We listen because the alternative is unthinkable, that the cosmos is deaf, that our cries vanish unheard, that the only prophecy is entropy. As the chapter closes, a low, resonant chord swells a choir humming a medieval dirge. Beneath it, a whisper, asterisk, finis venit. The Last Judgment's Latin chill lingers, then dissolves into silence. But in that silence, a question hangs, heavier than any answer. Do we crave these echoes because they hold meaning, or because we cannot bear the weight of a world that holds none? The screen fades to black, the music dies. Yet somewhere in the dark, a believer clutches a rosary, a skeptic smirks at the stars, and the prophecies spin on endless, enigmatic, eternally hungry for the next disaster to baptize them in fire.